Welcome back to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel. My name is Derek Brown, and on this video, we're going to run through 8 players for Week 5 that I think can outproduce their ranking right now in ECR on Fantasy Pros. Before we get to these 8 players, you want all the intel, all the data, all the knowledge, all the homework I've done for the Week 5, go read the primer at FantasyPros.com right now. It's going to help you know who to start, who to sit, who to flex, and who to fade for Week 5. Let's get into these 8 players. Okay, first running back up here, and this, I'm gonna be honest, it's a little bit thinner of a play, but I think he can outproduce and be a viable flex for people, especially in PPR leagues for Week 5, and that's Justice Hill. Looking at Justice Hill right now in ECR, RB32, and this all comes down to the pass game involvement. We know that for Justice Hill. That's what we need, okay? He has averaged 4 receptions and 40.3 receiving yards per game. Good numbers. He gets into the box, he gets into the end zone in any single week. That's RB2 type of production from a flex play. So with all the pass game involvement driving this, you have to say, okay, well, what has Cincinnati done versus running backs in the passing game? Oh, they've just allowed the 9th most receptions to running backs. Justice Hill scores this week or gets this similar volume through the air. It's going to be an RB3. Maybe he scores a low-end RB2. All right, staying with the running back position, and this is a player who has popped off with some big runs in the last few weeks. RB34 in ECR, Tank Bigsby. I'm an OG Tank truther. I have loved what I've seen out of Tank so far this year, and we really got to talk about it. The efficiency, the running angry. Every single week has been fantastic. He has 2 weeks where he's seen at least 29% of the snaps. In those 2 weeks, 10.5 rushing attempts, almost 83 rushing yards. We've seen the long plays. We've seen the tackle breaking ability, and it's been wondrous. Amongst 53 qualifying running backs, Tank Bigsby, first in explosive run rate, third in missed tackles forced per attempt, and first in yards to contact per attempt. Okay, how does this match up with Indy? We know that the Jaguars have a good matchup for the passing game, but you can run on this defense as well. They've really struggled to defend gap runs, giving up the 13th highest yards per carry, 12th highest success rate to gap runs, and that comprises almost 67% of Bigsby's rushing volume for this season. If he breaks off a long run again this week and scores a touchdown, you'd be glad you got him in your flex. All right, last running back I got to talk about here, and this is kind of a nasty play. I understand it. We've all watched the Denver Broncos offense over the last few weeks, but this is all just a volume play, and the matchup is there for a player that has really struggled to outproduce his ranking in ECR right now, and that's Javonte Williams. RB25, and again, this goes back to it's a volume play, people. I'm not telling you that I think Javonte Williams is an RB1 this week, but can he get a touchdown? Can he be an RB2? Can he be a guy for most teams at this point of the season? What we've seen out of Denver, you're starting him as a flex play. He's an RB3, but he could be more than that this week. The Raiders, yes, their pass defense has struggled. Their run defense is not any better, people. They've allowed the 9th highest explosive run rate, yards to contact per attempt, and rushing yards per game. For a Denver team that the defense is really coming on, man. They could shut down the Raiders' offense, and if they're just salting the clock away, it's a lot of volume for Javonte Williams and a really good matchup. All right, so the first wide receiver on this list this week, I'm going to talk about Jordan Whittington, wide receiver 48 in ECR right now, and he could be a wide receiver 3. A very strong flex play for you in Week 5. And what did we see out of Whittington last week? He got a ton of work. 27.6% target share, 2.2 yards per route run, and he was efficient with this volume. Now you look at the Green Bay Packers, they've allowed the 3rd highest PPR points per target to perimeter wide receivers. This game is likely going to shoot out. So the Rams, outside of Kyren Williams, are going to have to put up points on the other side. Matthew Stafford is still really good at football. So, do we really want to be tied to his wide receiver 1 this week in a game where they're probably going to go over the projected total? You absolutely believe we do. Get Jordan Whittington into your flex spot and enjoy the fantasy points this week. All right, before we break into the top 4 of this list, if you are juggling multiple fantasy football teams and feeling just a tad bit overwhelmed, Fantasy Pros is here to help you simplify things. With the Fantasy Pros Multi-League Assistant, you can see the latest news, notes, and rankings for every single player across all of your teams. It's in one spot. making your path to victory clearer and easier. Dive in and let us help you dominate all of your leagues with the multi-league assistant at fantasypros.com/myplaybook or on the Fantasy Football My Playbook app. Download it today. All right, breaking into the top 4 of this list, I got to give you a tight end because I know tight end is terrible right now. We're just hoping that we get tight ends that score any fantasy points, much less a lot. And there's a guy out there that's probably on the waiver wire in multiple leagues, and he's the tight end 19 in ECR on Fantasy Pros right now. And that's Tyler Conklin. And I'm not going to go out there and tell you need to be streaming and starting Tyler Conklin in every single week. No, far from it. Not a huge fan of Tyler Conklin. But I'm a big fan of playing tight ends when the matchup is right, and it is definitely right this week. We know the strength of the Vikings secondary is their corner play. Well, how do you stay away from that? You utilize the tight end. And the coverage matchup lines up for Tyler Conklin to have a big week this week. Minnesota has the highest too-high rate in the NFL right now at almost 79% of their defensive snaps. Why does this matter? Because when the Jets have faced too high, Tyler Conklin's target share has bumped to 16.4%, and his yards per route run, which is usually in the basement, has bumped to 1.75, which is a wonderful amount of yards per route run, especially the tight end position. Minnesota as well has been vulnerable to tight ends. They've allowed the 6th most fantasy points per game to the position, as well as the 7th most receiving yards per game to tight ends. If you are struggling at tight end, and you got a lot of options out there right now in Fantasyland where you're like, yeah, I don't know if I want to play them, consider streaming Tyler Conklin for week 5. All right, breaking into the top 3 of the list, got to get you a quarterback here, and I know it's been rough. The returns have not been good. This offense has been bad so far, but I'm telling you they're going to bounce back, and we're going to get to another Jaguar on this list. Tank Bigsby isn't ripping off huge runs versus the Colts. It's going to be Trevor Lawerence just throwing it over their heads this week for big touchdowns. And I know it's been rough for Trevor Lawerence. The QB 26 in fantasy points per game. He hasn't eclipsed 15 fantasy points in any single week. So I get if you're skeptical. I understand that. QB 16 in ECR right now. Okay, so the ranking, the production, it all lines up. I understand the worries. But we've seen the Colts pass defense give up huge games. Hello, Justin Fields last week. And hello, Trevor Lawerence in week 5. Indianapolis has allowed the 7th highest yards per attempt, the 6th most passing yards per game, and the 8th most passing or fantasy points via passing this season. All this means that Trevor Lawerence, Christian Kirk, Brian Thomas Jr. are going to go off this week. Enjoy playing Trevor Lawerence if you're struggling at quarterback this week. All right, so the number 2 player on this list, again, talking about a lot of these games that are possibly going to shoot out, we're going to go right back to the Colts and Jaguars matchup for Josh Downs. A little bit dismissive. People are being this week with the wide receiver 44 rank on ECR and Fantasy Pros. Come on, man. Give this guy some respect. Since he has returned to the lineup, he's tied with Michael Pittman for the team lead in target share with 28%. He's had 2.67 yards per route run. Did you see what he did last week? Okay, and you think in this matchup that he can't do it again? Jacksonville has been terrible at defending the slot, allowing the 8th most receiving yards to slot wide receivers and the 9th highest PPR points per target. Josh Downs is going to go off again in week 5. All right, the number 1 player on this list this week, and I hope you got him on waivers because he's going to explode in week 5, the man, the myth, the legend, Dontayvion Wicks. Coming in as wide receiver 31 in ECR, so I'm really close to cheating. I'm really close to violating the rules of this video, but he's not there yet. So if you're watching this, listening to this, maybe he's crept up into the top 30 wide receivers. But as time of recording, he's not there yet. So let's talk about Mr. Wicks. I think he's going to crush it again in week 5. Wide receiver 3 last week in fantasy had a 24% target share, 40% air yard share. He led the team with 4 end zone targets. And why do we want those? Because really high probability to score touchdowns, and he had 2 of them last week. Now you look at the matchup this week, the Rams run a lot of single high. Why does this matter? Because Dontayvion Wicks this season leads the team with a 33% target per route run rate against single high. He is second to only Jaden Reed in yards per route run against this coverage type with 2.7 yards per route run. And the Rams, look, this is just the Commanders secondary with another name. They cannot stop wide receivers this year. They're allowing the highest PPR points per target and the second most receiving yards per game to perimeter wide receivers. All this means in week 5, Dontayvion Wicks is going off yet again. Get him into your lineups. You picked him up off of waivers, confidently start him in week 5. All right, everyone, those are the picks. The players that you need to get into your lineups as flex plays or players that I think are going to outproduce their ranking in ECR on Fantasy Pros right now, and all the research, this lovely data and research to help you gain an edge in fantasy, brought to you by the Primer. Please, I take time, lots of time, every single week to write this up because I want you to win all of your fantasy matchups. So head over to FantasyPros.com, look at the Primer, read through it, use it to win all of your matchups, and use the multi-league assistant. Help us help you to juggle all of your leagues. I'll be back in week 6 with more picks. Get the W's this week.